While most of the country is watching London's market cool off, something extraordinary is unfolding in Plymouth that barely anyone is talking about. Property prices in this coastal city have surged by 12.6% in just 1 year, leaving experts scratching their heads and investors scrambling to understand what's driving this explosive growth. The question isn't just why Plymouth is booming, it's what this means for the rest of Britain and whether you're already too late to capitalise on it. Plymouth sits tucked away in Devon, far from the financial powerhouses of London and Manchester, yet it's quietly outperforming nearly every major city in the United Kingdom. While homeowners across England face stagnation or even decline, Plymouth residents are watching their property values climb at a pace that defies national trends. This isn't a fluke or a temporary blip on the radar. Something fundamental is changing in this city, and the implications reach far beyond its borders. If you want to stay ahead of the curve and understand where the UK property market is really heading, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter. We're bringing you the insights that matter, the stories the mainstream media overlooks, and the data that could shape your financial future. The numbers tell a story that contradicts everything we've been hearing about the British housing market. Nationwide, property prices have barely moved, with many areas experiencing declines as interest rates bite and economic uncertainty keeps buyers cautious. Yet, Plymouth has bucked every trend, posting growth that would make even the most optimistic estate agent do a double take. To put this in perspective, while the national average sits at less than 2% growth, Plymouth has achieved more than 6 times that figure. This isn't marginal outperformance, it's a completely different market operating by completely different rules. What makes this surge even more remarkable is the timing. These gains have materialised during one of the most challenging periods for UK property in recent memory. Mortgage rates have climbed to levels not seen in over a decade, squeezing affordability and forcing many would-be buyers to the sidelines. Consumer confidence has wavered as inflation bites into household budgets and recession fears loom large. Yet, amid all this turbulence, Plymouth has charged ahead, seemingly immune to the headwinds battering the rest of the country. Something is drawing people to this city with enough force to override the financial pressures that are cooling demand everywhere else. The catalyst behind Plymouth's property explosion isn't a single factor, but a perfect storm of circumstances that have aligned in ways few predicted. The city has been undergoing a transformation that started quietly but is now impossible to ignore. Major infrastructure investments have poured into the area, with transport links improving and connectivity to the rest of the country strengthening. The waterfront areas have seen significant regeneration, turning formerly neglected docks into desirable residential and commercial spaces. These aren't just cosmetic changes, they're fundamentally altering Plymouth's appeal and attracting a new demographic of residents and investors. But infrastructure alone doesn't explain a 12.6% surge. The pandemic reshaped how people think about where they live, and Plymouth emerged as an unexpected headwinner from that shift. Remote working liberated thousands of professionals from the need to commute to expensive city centres, and many began looking for better quality of life outside the urban pressure cookers. Plymouth offered something compelling: coastal living, relative affordability compared to London and the South East, and a genuine sense of community that had been eroded in larger cities. What started as a trickle of relocations became a flood, and with limited housing stock available, prices responded exactly as economic theory would predict. The ripple effects of this population influx extend into every corner of Plymouth's economy. Local businesses are thriving with increased demand, new restaurants and shops are opening, and the city centre is experiencing a renaissance that seemed impossible just 5 years ago. This economic vitality creates a self-reinforcing cycle where growth attracts more growth, and each new resident or business adds to Plymouth's appeal. Property developers have taken notice, with construction projects sprouting across the city to meet surging demand. Yet, even this building boom hasn't been enough to cool the market, a clear signal that demand is outstripping supply by a considerable margin. One element that rarely makes headlines but plays a crucial role in Plymouth's rise is its educational institutions. The University of Plymouth has expanded significantly, bringing thousands of students who need accommodation and often fall in love with the city enough to stay after graduation. This creates a steady pipeline of young professionals entering the local economy, many in sectors like marine science and engineering, where Plymouth has developed genuine expertise. Universities don't just educate, they anchor economies, attract talent, and create innovation ecosystems that can transform regions. Plymouth is leveraging its academic assets in ways that are paying tangible dividends in property values and economic vitality. The military presence in Plymouth is another factor that provides stability often overlooked by casual observers. As home to one of the Royal Navy's principal bases, the city benefits from consistent government investment and a population of service members and defence contractors who provide steady demand for housing. Military installations don't disappear during economic downturns. They provide an anchor that insulates local economies from some of the volatility affecting other regions. This defence connection has been part of Plymouth's identity for centuries, but its economic importance has grown as other traditional industries have declined. Tourism is quietly playing a bigger role than many realise in Plymouth's property market dynamics. The city's coastal location and proximity to Dartmoor National Park and Cornwall make it an attractive base for holidaymakers and second home buyers. The short-term rental market has exploded, with investors purchasing properties specifically to capitalise on Airbnb and similar platforms. This adds another layer of demand beyond traditional owner-occupiers and long-term renters, putting additional upward pressure on prices. Some locals argue this is pricing out residents, a controversy that's beginning to simmer beneath the surface of Plymouth's success story. The demographics of who's buying in Plymouth reveal patterns that challenge conventional wisdom about UK property. While London's market is dominated by foreign investors and wealthy buyers seeking pied-à-terre, Plymouth is attracting families, retirees, and young professionals seeking their first homes. The average buyer in Plymouth looks remarkably different from those in overheated southeast markets, with more diversity in income levels and backgrounds. This broader buyer base creates resilience, as the market isn't dependent on a narrow segment of ultra-wealthy purchasers whose fortunes can shift dramatically with global economic winds. Transport improvements deserve deeper examination because they're reshaping Plymouth's relationship with the rest of the country. Journey times to London have decreased, making the city viable for even occasional commuters. Better rail connections to Bristol and the Midlands have opened employment opportunities and made Plymouth feel less isolated than it once did. The city's port continues to develop, handling increasing cargo volumes and connecting Plymouth to European markets in ways that create jobs and economic activity. Every improvement in connectivity makes Plymouth more attractive. Each upgrade in transport infrastructure translates directly into property value increases. However, not everyone is celebrating Plymouth's property surge. Long-term residents are finding themselves priced out of neighbourhoods they've called home for generations. Renters face rapidly rising costs as landlords capitalise on increased demand and tighter supply. Young people who grew up in Plymouth are discovering that buying their first home in their hometown has become vastly more difficult than it was for their parents. This creates social tension that simmers beneath the headline numbers, a reminder that rapid property price growth creates winners and losers in ways that don't show up in percentage figures. The question on every investor's mind is whether Plymouth's surge is sustainable, or if we're witnessing a bubble inflating in real time. Property bubbles have burst before, leaving devastation in their wake, and the warning signs often look obvious in hindsight even when they're invisible in the moment. Some analysts point to fundamentals like employment growth, infrastructure investment, and demographic trends as evidence that Plymouth's rise is built on solid ground. Others worry that rapid price appreciation has disconnected from local incomes, creating a market vulnerable to correction if economic conditions deteriorate or interest rates climb further. Comparing Plymouth to other UK cities that have experienced similar surges offers instructive lessons. Bristol saw explosive growth in the 2000s. Manchester has been red hot for the past decade, and both have sustained their gains better than skeptics predicted. These cities shared characteristics with Plymouth, including strong universities, improving transport links, and lifestyle appeal that attracted young professionals. Yet, not every regional city has followed the same trajectory. Some saw brief spurts of growth that fizzled when underlying fundamentals proved weak or when economic headwinds arrived. Plymouth's challenge is proving it belongs in the former category rather than the latter. The lending environment adds another layer of complexity to Plymouth's property story. Banks and building societies have tightened mortgage criteria in response to economic uncertainty and regulatory pressure, making it harder for many buyers to secure financing. This should theoretically cool demand and moderate price growth, yet Plymouth has continued surging despite these headwinds. The explanation likely lies in the types of buyers entering the market. Many are equity-rich purchasers from expensive markets who are downsizing or relocating, bringing substantial deposits that make them less dependent on large mortgages. Cash buyers have become increasingly common, a fact that insulates the market from interest rate sensitivity. Local government policy is shaping Plymouth's property market in ways that don't always make front-page news. Planning decisions determine where new housing can be built, how dense developments can be, and which areas are protected from development. These choices have enormous implications for housing supply and therefore prices. Plymouth's council has faced criticism for not moving aggressively enough to approve new housing, contributing to the supply constraints driving prices upward. At the same time, they're trying to balance growth with preservation of the city's character and environment, a tension that plays out in council chambers and planning committees with real consequences for property values. The environmental dimension of Plymouth's appeal is worth examining as climate concerns increasingly influence where people choose to live. Coastal cities face long-term risks from sea level rise and increased storm intensity, factors that should theoretically depress property values. Yet Plymouth's coastal location is currently a selling point rather than a liability in buyers' minds. The city's relatively mild climate compared to northern England makes it attractive to retirees and those seeking better weather. This creates an interesting paradox where long-term climate risks are being overwhelmed by short-term climate preferences, a dynamic that could shift dramatically if major flooding or storm damage makes theoretical risks feel immediate. Investment firms and property funds have begun circling Plymouth, recognizing that the city offers opportunities that more established markets no longer provide. When institutional money flows into a regional property market, it can accelerate price growth and add liquidity, but it can also exacerbate affordability problems for local buyers competing against deep-pocketed corporations. The professionalization of property investment in cities like Plymouth changes market dynamics in fundamental ways, often increasing efficiency but potentially reducing opportunities for individual investors and first-time buyers who can't match institutional resources. The rental market in Plymouth tells its own story, one that's intimately connected to property prices but operates according to slightly different logic. Yields in Plymouth remain attractive compared to many parts of the UK, meaning landlords can still achieve decent returns relative to property prices. This sustains investor demand even as prices climb, since the income generated justifies the capital outlay. However, yields are compressing as prices rise faster than rents, a warning sign that the investment case is gradually weakening. If this trend continues, it could eventually cool investor demand and take some heat out of the market. Looking at Plymouth's property surge through a national lens reveals uncomfortable truths about regional inequality in the United Kingdom. While Plymouth booms, former industrial towns in the North and Midlands continue struggling with stagnant property values and economic malaise. The property market has become a barometer for broader economic divergence, with successful cities pulling away from those left behind by deindustrialisation and underinvestment. Plymouth's success is real and deserved, but it's also part of a story about Britain's increasingly uneven economic geography, where opportunity and prosperity concentrate in particular places while others are left to decline. The question of whether Plymouth represents a model that other cities can replicate is hotly debated among urban planners and economists. Can struggling coastal cities like Blackpool or Grimsby follow Plymouth's playbook and achieve similar transformation? The answer is complicated, because Plymouth's advantages, including its university, naval base, and proximity to popular tourist destinations, aren't easily replicable. Yet some elements of Plymouth's success, like focusing on quality of life, investing in infrastructure, and marketing the city effectively to remote workers, could potentially be adopted elsewhere. The risk is that every city trying to become the next Plymouth creates competition that dilutes the advantage any single city can achieve. International comparisons provide additional context for understanding Plymouth's property dynamics. Many coastal cities globally have experienced surges as demographics shift, and people prioritize lifestyle over proximity to traditional employment centers. Cities in Spain, Portugal, and Australia have seen similar patterns where coastal appeal attracts migrants from expensive inland cities. Plymouth is part of a global phenomenon, not an isolated case. Understanding these broader patterns helps distinguish which aspects of Plymouth's surge are specific to local circumstances and which reflect forces reshaping property markets across the developed world. The cultural transformation accompanying Plymouth's property boom is often overlooked but equally significant. New residents bring different expectations, tastes, and spending patterns that are reshaping the city's identity. Independent coffee shops replace greasy spoons, wine bars open where pubs once stood, and the demographic mix shifts toward younger, more educated populations. Long-term residents sometimes feel their city is being taken from them, replaced by something unrecognizable. This cultural dimension of gentrification creates tensions that economic statistics don't capture, but that shape how communities experience and respond to rapid change. Property developers' strategies in Plymouth reveal much about where they see the market heading. The types of homes being built, whether luxury apartments, family houses, or student accommodation, signal what developers believe will sell in the coming years. In Plymouth, there's been a notable shift toward higher-end properties, suggesting developers see a market with increasing wealth and sophistication. This can create a mismatch where new construction caters to affluent buyers, while moderate-income families struggle to find appropriate housing. The resulting supply-demand imbalance in different market segments contributes to price pressures and affordability challenges. The mortgage market's role in enabling Plymouth's surge deserves scrutiny. Despite higher interest rates, mortgages remain historically affordable in Plymouth compared to income levels, at least for now. Lenders view Plymouth as a lower-risk market than some other regions, partly because of its diversified economy and growth trajectory. This means credit flows relatively freely, enabling buyers to enter the market and sustain demand. If lenders' risk appetite changes, or if Plymouth's economic fundamentals weaken, this credit availability could evaporate quickly, potentially triggering a sharp market correction. Technology and digital infrastructure have quietly become crucial factors in Plymouth's appeal. Improved broadband connectivity has made remote working genuinely viable, removing a major obstacle that previously kept knowledge workers tethered to major cities. Plymouth has invested in digital infrastructure, recognizing that connectivity is as important as roads and railways in attracting modern businesses and residents. Cities that fail to prioritize digital infrastructure increasingly find themselves at a competitive disadvantage, unable to attract the remote workers and digital businesses that are reshaping regional economies. The insurance market provides an interesting window into long-term risks that property buyers may be overlooking in their enthusiasm for Plymouth. Coastal properties face higher insurance premiums due to flood risk, and these premiums are likely to rise as climate change increases storm frequency and sea level rise accelerates. Smart buyers factor insurance costs into their purchasing decisions, but in hot markets, caution sometimes gives way to fear of missing out. The gap between current market sentiment and long-term risk is where bubbles often form, and Plymouth's coastal properties may be an area where this gap is particularly wide. Social infrastructure, the less glamorous but essential services that make cities livable, is struggling to keep pace with Plymouth's growth. Schools are filling up, GP surgeries have long wait times, and public services are stretched thin by rapid population increases. These strains don't immediately affect property prices, but over time, declining quality of life can erode a city's appeal and slow growth. Plymouth's challenge is ensuring that infrastructure investment matches population growth, maintaining the quality of life that attracted people in the first place. The political dimensions of Plymouth's property boom are complex and increasingly contentious. Local politicians take credit for growth, pointing to their policies and investments as catalysts. Opposition voices argue that growth is happening despite policy failures, not because of wise governance, and that more should be done to ensure existing residents benefit rather than being displaced. National politicians look at Plymouth as either a success story proving their economic policies work, or as evidence that regional inequality is worsening depending on their political perspective. Property markets are never just economic, they're always political, and Plymouth is no exception. Some analysts are drawing comparisons between Plymouth and property markets in economically similar cities elsewhere in the UK, trying to determine if Plymouth's surge is unique or part of a broader pattern. Cities like Exeter, Bournemouth, and Truro have also seen strong growth, suggesting that smaller southern and coastal cities as a category are outperforming. If this is a broad trend rather than Plymouth-specific factors, it has different implications for sustainability and for where investors should look next. Pattern recognition is crucial in property investment, and Plymouth may be just one example of a larger phenomenon that smart investors are already positioning themselves to exploit. The wealth effect from property price increases is stimulating Plymouth's broader economy in ways that create momentum. Homeowners who've seen their equity increase feel wealthier and spend more freely, supporting local businesses. Some borrow against increased equity to renovate properties or start businesses, further stimulating economic activity. This wealth effect is real and powerful in the short term, but it's also fragile, depending on continued price appreciation to sustain confidence. If prices plateau or decline, the wealth effect can quickly reverse, turning virtuous cycles into vicious ones. Foreign investment in Plymouth's property market remains modest compared to London, but is growing. European buyers in particular are showing increased interest, attracted by relative affordability and the lifestyle Plymouth offers. Post-Brexit currency fluctuations have made UK property cheaper for foreign buyers, adding another source of demand. While foreign investment brings capital and supports prices, it can also trigger resentment among local buyers who feel they're competing with wealthier international purchasers. Finding the right balance between welcoming investment and ensuring local affordability is a challenge Plymouth is just beginning to grapple with. The commercial property sector in Plymouth is experiencing its own boom, often overlooked amid focus on residential prices. Office spaces in the city centre are filling up, retail units are finding tenants, and industrial properties are in high demand. Commercial property typically follows residential trends with a lag, as businesses locate where populations are growing. The strength of Plymouth's commercial market provides additional evidence that the city's growth has solid foundations, since businesses make location decisions based on careful analysis of demographics and economic prospects. Looking ahead, the key question is whether Plymouth can sustain its momentum, or if we're approaching a peak. Property cycles are inevitable. Periods of growth always eventually moderate or reverse. The timing is impossible to predict with certainty, but certain indicators provide clues. If local incomes fail to keep pace with property prices, affordability constraints will eventually dampen demand. If the broader UK economy slides into recession, even Plymouth's favourable fundamentals may not be enough to maintain growth. If interest rates continue rising, mortgage affordability will deteriorate and buyer numbers will decline. Yet reasons for optimism persist. Plymouth's transformation is still incomplete, with further infrastructure projects planned and economic diversification continuing. The city has room to grow unlike space-constrained London, meaning supply can theoretically respond to demand if planning policy allows. The fundamentals that sparked Plymouth's surge, including quality of life, connectivity, and relative affordability, remain intact. If these factors continue attracting people and businesses, the growth story could have years left to run. The property surge in Plymouth ultimately represents something larger than one city's success. It's a story about how Britain is changing, how the pandemic accelerated shifts in where and how people live, and how cities that position themselves strategically can thrive even in challenging times. It's about winners and losers in an increasingly unequal economy, about opportunities seized and communities transformed. Whether Plymouth's 12.6% surge is the beginning of a long-term transformation or a peak before correction, it's already reshaped the city fundamentally. And what happens next in Plymouth will provide crucial lessons about property markets, regional development, and the future of Britain's economic geography. The story is still being written, and those paying attention now will be best positioned to understand what comes next.